I'm going to introduce myself first. So I'm Mia Gardiner. I'll be facilitating this session for you this evening, and a little bit about my background. My background includes building and leading teams on a large scale basis and large scale programs across BC and Canada. I've worked with many organizations across the country, partnering, consulting, recruiting. My sort of superpower is my ability to understand individual strengths and develop complementary teams and groups that work really well together. And I now own a little HR and advisory recruitment firm here in the Kootenays that's Kootenay based called Kootenay Talent and Recruitment. So I've been contracted to work with the Kootenay Childcare Initiative. And my role is to work with childcare centers across the Kootenays to support recruitment. So some of you may be working with me. I'm not sure who's all on the call already on recruitment. If some of you aren't and you're interested in that, we can work together after this is done as well. A little housekeeping before we get started. So feel free to leave your camera off and do what you need to do and just sort of be listening. Also, you can raise your hand. Well, I was going to say that, but it's actually going to be really difficult for me to see people raise their hands. So if you have a question, just come off your mic and feel free to ask. I will leave time at the end for questions and a little bit of discussion as well, so that we can talk through any particulars that people have. And as well as that, you're welcome to contact me after this and we can go through, we can set up a time, we can go through your individual considerations, concerns, anything like that around recruitment as well. So I'm here for you, and I hope that I can impart something useful to you this evening. Okay, let's start with why hiring can be a bit of a challenge. So, with the growth required to meet needs in the childcare sector, there's not as many ECEs in the Kootenays as there's going to be demand for over the next couple of years. We do have two colleges, of course, educating ECEs throughout the Kootenays, and that's Selkirk College and College of the Rockies. And of course, there's other programs throughout BC. So we do have some local students, and a lot of students are completing their courses online and are coming from other communities or living in other communities. So we have a number of challenges that we face when we're hiring. And if you're experiencing difficulty keeping your staff complement full, you're not alone. And that may or may not persist over the next few years. But if you have a growing center or you're growing your team or you have turnover, well, we will have a webinar on retention. So if you have turnover, it's really important to think about retention. But as you're growing, it's going to be important to consider how to recruit and hire in the most efficient and effective way, because of course your time is super valuable. As you can see on the slide, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this slide because we'll tackle sort of three of the main challenges in the next webinar and we'll really look at solutions. But just there's a shortage of ECEs in Canada and BC all around. It's a very competitive job market. You know, advertising costs and what is effective in terms of advertising can be a challenge for people. And then reviewing resumes can be really exhausting. So if you get a lot of resumes and some of them may or may not be qualified, then that can be pretty exhausting. Finding the right person, not just filling a seat, can also be a bit challenging. And then the temporary foreign workers and immigration considerations, that can be a little bit of a challenge for people in itself, both for the workers seeking jobs and for the employers, because navigating all of the various different rules and steps, et cetera, that the government has in place can be a challenge. And yet that's a great pool of candidates and a very strong pool of candidates. So while I can't personally give immigration advice to anyone, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the challenges webinar, but the IRCC consults with businesses, CBAL is a good resource. I understand ECEBC has done a webinar, and you can always speak with an immigration consultant. But this is one of the challenges, I think, if you have the time to dig in and figure that out for yourself and where the parameters are, then it's worthwhile and would increase your candidate pool to some extent. Is there any questions before I move on? Okay, moving on. So just a little bit of thought needs to go into things before we post the role. Before you post a position, we want to consider really what the position description is, why we're looking for this person, potentially how they complement the rest of the team. So really think through the details of what you need, what you're providing to the new employee in terms of training, onboarding, how are you making sure that they get in the job in a way that works for them and helps them be really successful in the role. Often, if you hire without taking that step back to be really planful about it, the hire ends up with complications. Maybe sometimes your new staff doesn't really understand, or maybe you accidentally portray the wrong sort of things that you're looking for in the interview, or don't quite hire for your needs. And then immediately sometimes friction can start, and it may or may not be resolvable. So, you want to avoid those complications by really thinking through who will they be working with? What is the structure and the culture of your center? How will the new person be trained and who will train them? You want to map out their role in relation to others as well as their level of responsibility. So you want to make sure you're thinking about, is that person going to be bumping into other people? How will they work together? How do they understand how they work together? These might be things that we just assume we can figure out later. Often I work with clients who think, oh, yeah, well, onboarding's onboarding, that'll happen later. But if you've thought it out prior and you're really clear with candidates, you can really highlight the positive things that you have to offer and avoid pitfalls, misunderstandings, and you're going to be more successful in that hire. Even if it takes a little bit longer to hire that person, that is saving time compared to hiring the wrong person and having to go through back to the drawing board and having sort of wasted everybody's time working through really difficult situations. So really worth taking that time to think it through. And there's quite a lot of things to think through. And of course, wages and benefits matter. Additional benefits like wellness programs, partnerships in the community that offer discounts. Like, is there anything that you can offer that sort of puts your center above the rest in terms of that competitiveness? Because, like I said, it's a competitive market for ECEs. And what that means is that there's more jobs than people to fill them. Therefore, the ECE searching for the job has options. And so, why are they going to choose you? You need to be really clear on that before you even go out to market. I really like to make sure that I'm working with clients to help them know that value proposition and that I know that value proposition so that I can represent them accurately and I can attract the right people to the role. So when you prepare your job description, have all of these things thought out, but then when you write the job description, you want it to read like an invitation, not a laundry list of tasks. And I know that's a little bit tricky because I think most people are used to writing a job description in a way that is, these are the things we need from you. But I love to see job descriptions that have the job description, the qualifications and competencies, and then also what are we providing to the candidate? So what's our commitment to you? Some companies put it that way, our commitment to you, or what we're giving you, or what we provide. And that can be a really nice little section to add to your job description, either at the top or the bottom. And then you want to think about what the posting's going to look like. What does it look like on your website? Do you want to brand it? Because while posting sites like Job Banks Canada, for example, it's very, you don't have the opportunity to just upload a PDF. You don't have a branded document. What you have is bullet points basically and the section. So you're just posting the job description. And if you're lucky, you get a little paragraph that gets to highlight who you are as an organization. So there's that. But then if you also have something that's a more fulsome document, like a PDF that goes on your website and is branded and looks nice and is enticing, maybe then you have more opportunity to talk about the center, what you do there, what your philosophy is, what your values are, what your mission is. You want to let people know um, how many child care seats you have available and how many families you're working with if you can, and just talk a little bit, give them a sense of what is this job, who would I be working with. So if you're the candidate, you're wondering, who am I working with, what does that look like? And then if you're trying to attract somebody from out of town, you might want to highlight a little bit about the town that you live in and what are some of the great things about that without being too salesy, because we want to be honest. Most towns in the Kootenays have a difficult time with housing. There's some challenges there around placing people in a role, making sure they get housing if they're moving in. And you might have to work with candidates to overcome some of those things. If you have a really great candidate that's moving from another town, then it's going to be worth it. So there's a lot here in this slide. And at this point, we're still kind of preparing the posting and preparing the job description. And we want to now think about marketing that role. So, there's a thing in the recruiting business. We don't just post and pray, right? We really want to market the role. We don't just want to hope the right person walks in the door. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next slide. But what's the ideal kind of person you're looking for, and where do they look for jobs? What is appealing to them, and what does that sound like, and what does that look like? And that influences what you're going to highlight and what you potentially highlight that you can provide for them as well, and where you post the role. So I'll just flip to the next slide. Once we get to posting the role, there's a few really important things to remember about that as well. Any questions before I dive into posting the role? Any questions about building the job description, considering the team? Okay, good so far. So as you prepare the posting, you want to make sure you've considered some legal requirements. In BC, it is the law to post the wage, so you have to post the wage. Also, you have to be realistic about the requirements of the role and what the expectations are, because once you hire someone, you're fairly bound by the position that you provide them and the hours that you anticipated they would have and what their work location is. You can't just sort of move people around in jobs in your organization. You can make changes to their job description with written consent. They need to agree to that. It needs to be in writing. So there needs to be conversation about that. So let's say you have 2 or 3 locations and you have another staff and you'd love them to work at the other location. Without having written into the job description that locations may vary, you'll need to let them know that you would like them to move to the other location. They're going to have to agree to that, and you're going to have to update that job description, because otherwise you start to get into sticky situations if things go a little bit sideways, or if the person leaves or they need to leave or anything like that. So small adjustments are acceptable with mutual agreement, but all in all, when you hire somebody with a certain job description, that's the job description. So it's really important when we're advertising, essentially, that we're not false advertising a position, or sort of setting ourselves up for a conflict when the person is hired. Because if we weren't realistic and clear, and this goes back to what I was saying earlier about what we want and what our expectations are, then we run into conflict very quickly. And then we have a retention problem. Um, for advertising, create an advertising plan. It only takes a minute to just sort of brainstorm the places that you think you should advertise, whether or not you have any money to spend. Maybe it's $50, maybe you have a $200 budget, and where you'll post. So definitely leverage your own social media. Not your personal, but your center's social media if you have it. So if you have Facebook, Instagram, that can be really helpful. Believe it or not, people do look there, and there's a lot of groups. There's Kootenay job board groups, and I post in them whenever I'm posting a role. And I don't get a lot of candidates out of there. I think the idea there is that the more you kind of get the word out, the better, because people will refer people. People will say, "Oh, I saw this posted." And next thing you know, someone's been referred, and you don't always know exactly where they came from, but it's worth getting it out everywhere that you can. For both Facebook and Instagram, it can help if you have the PDF document to post, and if it has it like a pretty picture on the front, or if you build a little, and you can even use AI for this, if you build a little post and post a picture of your town, and then we're hiring, or a picture of your center, however you want to do that. Um, so just social media tiles are really helpful when you're posting. I use LinkedIn a lot. So what I do, and this may not be within everybody's realm, because if you haven't built out your LinkedIn, it ends up being kind of a waste of time. But I use LinkedIn a lot, and I proactively reach out to, I've probably connected with every ECE in BC and Alberta on my LinkedIn. Like if I can find them, I've connected with them. And if they connect back, then I can message them. And then I reach out and I say, hey, we have these positions available. Are you interested? Some of them, they're not interested. You have to be prepared that, you're going to get some no's, but it's worth kind of getting the word out there too. And sometimes I will, if they look like they've been in their job for a really long time, I might just say, do you know anybody who's interested? And maybe they pass it around. And that tends to be how I get the word out. Beyond ECEs, I recruit for a lot of different positions, and LinkedIn is definitely one of my best tools. So it's a little sort of recruiter tip for where and how to find people. ECEBC advertises jobs. I think it's $35 a job. And I can't remember, we did post there at one point, and I can't remember if it's 2 weeks or a month for that $35, but that's really worth it because you see positions on the coast, you see positions in Kamloops, you just see different positions on there. And obviously ECEs, it makes sense to post where they might be going. Now, I have little beef with Indeed. Some people find it successful. I don't necessarily go there. What happens with Indeed, also with LinkedIn, if you actually pay for the ads, the you've paid for an ad, but the candidates can hit quick apply. And so when they hit quick apply, a lot of times they don't have to have really thought out whether or not they're qualified for the role. So what I find, and I've tried a few times over the years to just, let's see what happens if we try Indeed now. And what I get is just inundated with stacks and stacks of resumes, and I have to look through them all. And a lot of them aren't qualified. So I find I'm exhausting myself looking at these resumes. And so, of course, I'm a recruiter. I'm going to want to take a more targeted approach. But if you don't have the time for the more targeted approach, you're going to spend the time looking through resumes of people who maybe aren't qualified. Maybe they're not even an ECE, and they've applied for the job anyways. So that's a little bit difficult. I do find that the job boards like Canada Jobs, uh, when you post on Canada Jobs, it posts to other automatically to like Work BC sites. And then locally, we have Kootenay Employment Services, and we have Kootenay Jobs, which is KCDS in Nelson. So if you post to both of those, and you post to the job boards, then you're covering all of the sort of Work BC regions, and the people that are really job hunting tend to look there. Sometimes you can entice somebody, and this is the job of a recruiter, and why we're sometimes called headhunters is because sometimes you can entice somebody who's already working in Alberta or in northern BC or over on the coast, and they never really thought about it. But once you get it in front of them, they go, "Oh, wow, I really could use a change," and then they're interested in that job. So think about what towns and cities you want to reach. Where do you want to, how far do you want your reach to go? And you can then go to specific groups on Facebook in those towns and cities. You can go to job boards that are related to those towns and cities. And some of this I understand, like you all don't have a lot of time, and some of what I'm telling you is time heavy. So let's go back to what I was saying before. You want to make a bit of an advertising plan because then you know where you're going to spend your time and where you're not going to spend your time. And you're really careful with that and try to pick the places you think are going to be the most effective. And I'm here through this program. Like it costs you nothing to reach out to me and get my advice. So whether you want to engage with me in the process or whether you just want to reach out and say, "Hey, I built an advertising plan. Do you have any thoughts on that?" We talked about benefits. We talked about what to offer. If it's possible to sort of cram some of that into your advertising or have it as part of your job description. So again, and maybe I can pull up one to show you when the slideshow is done. But um, again, if you have all of that as part of the job description, you have a little section that is, what we offer, then it goes into the job description and you can put it right up front because then people know right away. Candidates think to themselves, and especially in a competitive market, what's in it for me? What's in it for me if I pick this job over this job? So if right up front you have what we offer and there's some really good, juicy stuff in there, then that's going to help you out. Highlight your strengths. And on social media, you can kind of build that so you don't just have to post the job. You can post the job one day, and then the next day you can post something, or 2 days later, you can post something that says, "Hey, did you know here we this and that? By the way, we're still hiring. You can follow up in a week," that kind of thing. So there's some strategies there around advertising that could really help you. The last thing I want to say about this part is think about what you can't do or what you don't want and be realistic about that. Because again, your time is precious. So there's no point in wasting it because if you know, pepper the whole world, you might get a response from the whole world. And that's not necessarily what you want. So if a client of mine is interested in working with somebody who has less experience and is fresh out of school, I'll reach out to the colleges and I'll see if there's any recommendations that some of the instructors have or things like that to try and get those types of applicants. And I will post on the college websites. If I don't want if my client really is looking for an experienced ECE, then I'm not going to find them in the colleges because that's usually where they're just fresh out of school and less experienced. So they might be experienced in some sort of childcare and then went and got their ECE, or they might have experience as an ECAA and then, so those nuances are important and is part of thinking about what you want and teasing out what you don't want. And don't waste your time attracting what you don't want. Focus right in on what you do want. Any questions about this part? Okay. I won't spend too much time here because I did go over some of it in the marketing, but 98% of the applicants I place are people that I proactively sought out. Um, So I go find people, and I find more effective than advertising post and pray. So I'm going to give you a few little tips on that. make a quick list of people you know and send the job to your contacts. Don't hesitate to say, to the CCRR in the area or to whoever you know that's in your networks, because word of mouth, I probably don't have to tell you, especially in the Kootenays, is a very strong form of advertising. So feel free to email your job description, and especially if you've got that nice little PDF or something nice that's easy to send to your contacts. You can even put it in your email signature. By the way, we're hiring, or did you know we're hiring, with a link to the position description. When you're looking for something in particular, you often have to just go beyond the applicants that are coming forward. Um, so again, you can use Facebook or LinkedIn. You can post the role to your social media channels. You can get your staff to send it to people they know. And some companies or organizations have referral bonuses. So they even offer staff referrals if they bring in additional staff. And this can be a wonderful way to get new staff, because if they're referred by a staff member, you already know they're more likely to fit with your style, with the way that the team works. You still have to vet them, and you still have to be careful about that because you don't want to make assumptions. But it's a great way to get staff. Tell people that you meet, that you're looking for someone. If you're out networking or chatting with somebody, just let them know that you're hiring. And talk about the great things you offer. So it doesn't always have to be an ask, and it doesn't always have to be, hey, I'm hiring. Do you want to come work for me? I mean, I uh, typically am shameless about making asks of people, but you can also just talk about the great things you offer as an employer and hope that that helps spread the word and that people go, oh, hey, did you know? Okay. Now we're going to get into vetting candidates. And there's a few things to know here. Um, I have a little pro tip that's basically going to change the way you hire if you adopt this pro tip, and it's make a competency matrix. So, sounds more complicated than it is, and I'm going to show you what it looks like on the next slide. But basically, you take your job description, you break it down, or your qualifications. It's actually more the qualifications part of your job description, the competencies that you're looking for. So let's say you said, I want 5 years experience. I need an ECE. Um, I need them to live in my community. So if you have these kinds of criteria, you lay them out across the top of a little spreadsheet, and then you can quickly track candidates and you can quickly vet resumes and quickly move through those candidates in a way that you can trust now that you've already thought it through and you know what you're looking for and you know whether or not that candidate has it. And then you're able to compare candidates against each other and invite candidates to interviews if they meet your core competencies. So I suggest you develop the matrix or checklist. It can be a checklist, but I find the visual of the matrix is pretty cool. And then as you review resumes, you've maybe picked three top things where you're like, they're out if they don't have this. And then you can quickly, they're out. You don't even have to put them on the matrix. You know right away that if they don't have that 5 years experience, you're going to put them in the not right now pile. And you can maybe revisit them later if you don't find that 5 years experience. And hopefully you're being very realistic about what you're looking for at this point, right? And then you can plot the ones onto your matrix who do meet those core criteria. And then you can see what other criteria comes across in their resume and cover letter. You review very quickly at first for that top three criteria. And then the ones that are making it now onto your competency, you can review in more detail for those competencies and the values demonstrated. And then I suggest considering two interviews. So I actually, okay, so when I'm recruiting and I'm working with a client, I do a screening call and generally I do a full preliminary interview, which might be a half hour or an hour depending on the role. But for ECEs, it's a half an hour I spend with them and I learn a bit about them and I plot them on my matrix based on that. And then we'll recommend to the client if they should interview them, and that will be a 30-minute to 1 hour interview. So, 45 minutes is pretty nice. Um, and we'll set that up. So I recommend definitely looking at the 15-minute screening call for the people who come across on your matrix as candidates that you want to talk to and learn a little bit more about. And the reason for that is that screening call, you get the opportunity to confirm a few things. So I'll go into a little bit more detail in a minute. And then you want to make sure that your interview questions are kind of lined up with the competencies as well, so that when you're interviewing based on, there are human rights codes, and we want to try and get past bias a little bit. And pardon me, we all have inherent biases. So you want to think about that bias in hiring and really look at the competencies. Can this person do the job? And are they going to work well with the other members of the team? So I hire based on values and the ability of that person to work with the team, as well as the competencies for the role. So this is the competency matrix. And what I do is I plot the candidate's name. I hope you can see the cursor. And then I put the location they're in because I like to keep track of, is this person going to have to move? How far are they going to have to go? And when I talk to them, if they are going to have to move, when I do that 15-minute screening call, one of the things I'm going to have to ask is, what are your moving plans? Because now we're looking at what's their potential for the start date. Am I going to have to support them through that moving process? Do they need help with housing? So this is kind of important. The ECE certificate, and you might want to confirm in the 15-minute call, do they have the certificate? What institution, what year? Sometimes they're not, that information's not on the resume. So sometimes they say they have a full ECE certificate, but you might want the details. The number of years experience. So I can plot that out off the resume because you can see how many years of experience they have. So these for me in this purple section, those are the primary things I'm looking for. So when the people need to meet my criteria in that section in order to even get to the screening interview. And then I'm going to confirm those things in the screening interview. And during my screening calls, I then ask questions and I format my questions so that they get to these competencies. So tell me about how you help a child. Tell me about how you've turned a child's play into a learning opportunity. And this helps me answer a couple of these questions. And then what I do is I go red, yellow, green. So red, they don't really have the competency I'm looking for. Yellow, yep, they meet the criteria, maybe just barely. Green, oh yes, 100% this person meets the criteria that I'm looking for. So you can see again how what we've talked about thus far, the clarity that you get through this, I'm walking you through a thinking process of now by the time you get to this point, you're really clear on what you're looking for, and it's a lot easier to assess whether or not this person has what you're looking for. Any questions about the competency matrix? Okay. Interview questions are they're almost a subject in themselves. I use a mix of behavioral style questions and situational questions. And then, of course, just straight up, do you have your certificate and what year is it? Behavioral style questions are really about asking about behaviors in the past. So when in the past have you done this? And you just kind of take that competency or that core thing that you're looking for. So if you're looking for somebody who can write a plan, a lesson plan, or write a education plan, um, then I've lost the words entirely for that. I know you all know what I'm talking about. If you need somebody who's done that before, or you want to know if they can do it, then past behavior indicates future behavior. So it's a really good idea to turn that into a question. So you just basically go through your list of qualifications or competencies or job duties, and you can turn them into questions. So you can say, when in the past have you written a, or when in the past have you worked with a family or communicated with a family around a difficult situation with a child? And then they're going to explain to you when they've done that, or they might not have ever done that. And you're going to start to see that in their body language. And those kinds of questions help us get past the people that can sort of um, gloss gloss you over. Some people really just are good at interviews, and some people are kind of not very good at interviews, but they're really good at the job. So you want to get through that. You want to get through that part. So what you're looking for is alignment. You're looking for alignment on competencies, your expectations for the role. You're looking for a values alignment, connection to the way you do childcare, the way your team functions, the things that are important to you. You're looking for alignment on that commitment. So sometimes I always ask about, why does the candidate want this job? Why are they interested in this center? Why do they want to move to that town? Their interest in childcare and children, is that something where they're going to stick around for a while? They really are picking you on purpose. Mutual understanding of what expectations and values are is something you want to confirm through the interview process. An agreement on logistics. So working hours, scheduling, pay and benefits, their availability to start. I have pay and benefits and wages and benefits. So, they're the same thing. Any questions about that? Okay, so just a little bit about screening calls. I recommend about 15 minutes. Sometimes, if you're somebody who likes to have more of a conversation, schedule a half an hour. And if it takes 15 or 20 minutes, that's okay. You're better to schedule more time and go under than schedule too little time and then feel pressured and like you're not getting it, because the candidate's time is valuable as well. And they may or may not have 15 more minutes if you're running over that. So whatever time you schedule, make sure you're falling within that time, not beyond that time. Um, and it's a great first step. And again, it just confirms what you're seeing on the resume and allows you to start exploring with that candidate a little more about what their approach is and whether or not it makes sense to do a full interview. And you can have, if you have a staff person that's interested in doing screening calls, you can do that. It's really important to keep your interview and screening group tight. So we have to protect the confidentiality of candidates. That's absolutely a legal requirement. So whoever you involve in the hiring process needs to understand that and needs to keep it confidential. So we don't go talking around town about who's applied or things like that, or kind of checking out sometimes their social media. You want to do that carefully. If candidates already have a job, we can sometimes compromise their existing job if we're poking around too much too. So you introduce yourself in that screening call. You talk about what you're looking for. You clarify any questions you have from the resume. You ask about their move to town if that's appropriate. You ask if they have any questions about the position or the center. And this is a really great indicator from them what kind of person they are. The kinds of questions they ask you are really important as well. And just get a sense of their interview availability if you're thinking like you want to move forward. And you might ask them a couple of additional questions just around values alignment, but you want to keep it pretty minimal in that screening call and save some of your bigger questions for the interviews. Interviews are one of the most difficult situations for anyone to ever be in. So, if you've ever interviewed, and most people have, like it can actually bring out the absolute worst in us, and yet we're trying to do our best. It is just the test of a lifetime. You're trying to put your absolute best foot forward no matter what. And often interviewers have an unrealistic expectation of candidates. So we want to see what they're going to look like to work with. We want to see who they are, and we want to see if they have the skill we're looking for. We don't want to test them, put them on the spot, or make it difficult for them, because a nervous candidate doesn't give you who they really are. And you want to see who they really are. So if you're able to create a comfortable interviewing situation and you meet the person where they're at, even if you decide not to go forward with them, at least you've created a good experience for both you and them. And you can then know that you did your best to get the best out of them. And they may still be nervous. Some people talk more when they're nervous. Some people are too quiet. Their answer's too short. Some people's are too long. I see so many different kinds of nervous behavior. And the best you can do to alleviate that is a really good idea. So introduce yourself, create a comfortable environment, let them know there's going to be time for their questions at the end, create that space. And that's where sometimes I recommend more like a 45-minute interview, sometimes an hour. It just depends. Is it in person? You want to get used to interviewing on Zoom if there may be candidates from out of town. If there's candidates from out of town, it's kind of important to just in terms of an equitable process to interview all the candidates the same way. So if we're switching up questions and we're switching up interview style, then we're apples to oranges, right? We're comparing apples to oranges. If you interview each person with the same questions, basically, you want to use the same questions and you want to use the same interview style, then you're actually comparing apples to apples. Have your questions prepared. A half-hour interview allows for 7 or 8 questions. Generally, you can give a candidate, you can kind of do the math this way. It takes about 3 minutes for a candidate to answer a question really well, depending on the questions. I mean, obviously, if it's a yes or no question, not so much, but most of your questions should be geared to having them draw out examples and talk about what they think and how they feel and who they are, to give you more insight. Then give them time to ask their questions at the end. Take notes and have your competency chart or checklist, just have it open, right? You don't have to be filling it out at the time, and I don't recommend that. But if your questions aren't exactly aligned, then you just want to have it open to make sure that you've actually gathered the information you're looking for by the end, in case you miss something. Show your values and the culture of your center, and look for a connection with them and their connection with you, because that connection is going to be important going forward. And it doesn't mean you can't hire somebody if the connection wasn't there on a half-hour Zoom meeting. But you might, if you need to have a third interview, like an actual in-person interview before you hire them, if you need to do a next step, I have clients who even go through 3 interviews with their candidate and then say, oh, now we need to just go for coffee and see how they are on a more casual basis. So sometimes it's just, you want to make sure that it's a big decision for them and for you, and especially if there's a move involved. And if you want that retention, if you are into hiring and having people move on and continuously hiring, that's okay. You don't have to put as much thought into your hire, but if you want to retain people and really build a solid, strong team, put the thought in. So making decisions and offers. Let's say you're choosing between 2 or 3 candidates. Go back to your original requirements, check in with yourself, even if you are just deciding on one candidate. Are they committed to working with you for more than a year or 6 months? Because the cost of turnover is actually quite costly. When you go to offer a job, be excited. Like, congratulations, we're really excited to bring you on board. Collect and check their references quickly, because candidates can move on. If If you're slow through this process, they might just get another job. They've probably applied for multiple things if they're looking for work. Don't leave them, don't leave them waiting. Secure the start date once they've accepted the offer. Get that in writing, whether it's via email. So usually I make an offer over the phone, and then I follow up immediately with an email that says, as we discussed, we're prepared to offer you this, and um, and they come back with their acceptance of that offer in writing. Or you can have an offer letter, even better. If you have an offer letter prepared and it kind of outlines the job and this is the offer and they're ready to sign that offer letter, that's great. And then you can insert the start date. So you want to, in the midst of those discussions, kind of secure that start date. If they have to move and the start date's a month from now, put that in the offer letter. And sometimes you're required to have flexibility, even if it's in the letter, and that just be prepared for that, and that's okay too. And you may have to support them in finding, you know, housing, and there's different ways to do that, but it's a whole other conversation. So when the new person starts, and I'm only going to touch on this because this is Recruitment 101, but have an onboarding plan, as we talked about at the very beginning. Understand it takes a couple weeks to impart your knowledge and sometimes more. Impart your knowledge for have other staff members be willing to mentor or talk to the person about what it's like to work there, or take them for coffee, whatever it is you think is helpful for getting that person on board. Now, if they moved from out of town, consider in your onboarding plan helping connect them to resources so that they don't feel lonely 3 months down the road, because sometimes people leave the town because they didn't make other connections outside of work. So if your workplace isn't that kind of place where everybody's all connected and your team is tight, which can happen, if you have a tight team, you want your new person to feel valued and like they can come on board and be a part of that team. And if you don't have a super tight team and people don't hang out after work and things like that, then you might want to make the effort to sort of help your new person get comfortable in the town and be connected with something that helps them make it work. Build trust with them, and building trust means checking in frequently if they're getting what they need to settle in, and then also responding to questions and concerns that they have. And they may have them, and they may be feeling really insecure about asking questions or having concerns. So it's so important to kind of check in and give the space for that, because new candidates aren't likely to bring that up themselves because they just feel like a squeaky wheel, and fair, often then they might get labeled as a squeaky wheel. Check in with other staff and address any concerns immediately. So you kind of want to make sure the team is starting to jive and that people are comfortable. And if there's concerns, you're working your way through that in the most positive way possible. Just generally create a warm and responsive environment where your new staff know what's expected and have opportunities to ask questions. So that's it. I talked a lot. I've been at career fairs for the last 2 days, so I'm not going to lie. I am a little sick of my own voice. I'm happy to have discussion or answer any questions that anyone has. You can also contact me by emailing me, maya@kootenayrecruitment.ca. We do have 2 upcoming recruitment sessions as well in the next couple of months, so we can talk about other things then. Yeah, any questions?